Hi. This video is a little late, but we're going to look through the anime I watched in spring 2019 and give them a little review. I'm going to be scoring them as I did before. If you're curious about why I want to start scoring anime and kind of what the benefits of those are, you can watch the extremely long winter 2019 anime reviews video, which you can also find on this channel. We got 5 shows to talk about today, so let's plunge right into it. Oh, wait, first, let's talk about a few things that won't appear in this video, things that I didn't end up watching. Kimetsu no Yaiba, the Demon Slayer. I've heard this is solid shonen action, a great shonen series. I think I'd rather just read it, though. I don't really have any interest in picking up something like that just to watch. I don't know. We Can't Study, Bokuben. I watched a couple episodes. I thought if the production quality was high enough and it had kind of the appeal of like Shaft's Nisekoi, I could end up watching this even though I'm already reading it. But the production quality is just like, so I dropped it. And Carol and Tuesday I'm watching, but of course it's a 2-core, so we're going to be covering it in the video for next season, and we're not going to talk about it today. So, of things I did watch, first one we'll talk about is Strike Witches 501 Butai Hashin Shimasu, or Strike Witches 501 Division takes off, something to this effect. This is a short you probably didn't watch or even hear about. It's very, very low budget, really kind of hardly animated, just little chibi cartoons squawking at each other. There's lots of shorts like this that are made every season. You probably don't watch or hear about them at all. But I watched this one because I like Strike Witches. So it's a spin-off of Strike Witches, of course, minus any of the battling and really any of the fan service. And if you know anything about Strike Witches, it's probably that girls wearing no pants fly around fighting things. So you might wonder what's left if you take out all of the battling and the fan service. And what it is it's all just kind of sitcom-esque character-driven humor. So it's all of the girls living together on this base, preparing for an attack by the evil Neroi, and just having a laugh trying to get along. And to this effect, they've exaggerated all of the characteristics of the characters from the original to the point of kind of self-parody, and in some cases representing the fanon, representing how these characters have been exaggerated by fans in the years since the original series, and actually incorporating those characteristics back into the show, which I think is really cool. Like the best example I can think of is Lynette, who for some reason in the fanon started being represented as like very creepy, that she has this like real dark side to her, or the fact that Yoshika-chan, the main character, is like a huge pervert. There's like a few jokes to that effect in the original, but it was something that was like much more in kind of fan works, and now tons and tons of jokes based on this premise are being used in the spin-off. So I think that's just great. And they really lean into some aspects of the premise that you didn't really think about too much in the original series, just because there wasn't really time to comedic ends. So things like the fact that it's set in the 1940s, so they're lacking a lot of the kind of scientific and medical knowledge that we have today. Cultural barriers between the characters, since they come from all different places on Earth and they don't really understand each other's countries. Technical war crimes, strange things that the characters are doing with military funding and their free time and stuff that technically are completely against every code of conduct they're supposed to have as soldiers. That here it's treated for a good laugh, whereas in the original, all of that stuff is just kind of glossed over. So that's quite fun too. And it's set in an alternative canon, one that is often in direct conflict with the original series, where basically they're just never attacked. They're hanging out on the military base, they're constantly waiting for an attack, but one just never comes, and they're never actually called into combat. And I think that's like very endearing as a concept, that these are characters that we like, these are characters that we were quite endeared to through the original show, and now they get this chance to have peace. They have a peaceful life instead, a life of just comedy and frivolousness and friendship. And I don't know, I thought that was a nice like gift to the characters. So is that maybe why these shows get made? It seems like this type of show can't really make very much money. The audience is extremely limited. It's not really going to grow Strike Witches as a brand. Um, so you can kind of have like a cynical reading of it where they have the rights to the series, and these shows are extremely cheap to make, so they figure like, I might as well just churn something out. Probably the most devout fans are going to buy copies of it, so we'll make a little bit of money. It can't hurt. But then there's kind of a more charitable reading where it's like, well, there hasn't been any Strike Witches properties in quite a while. I think there's a new season of Strike Witches coming soon-ish. So maybe they're trying to get people kind of like excited about that, kind of get them back familiar with these characters. But I think it's even more so just kind of like, well, I think the fans would appreciate this. I think the fans would enjoy seeing these characters in this way. So when you think of the Western media marketplace, like Hollywood or whatever, if they have the rights to some property that was successful in the past, you see the same sort of thing where stuff is just kind of constantly getting churned out. They have to make use of that property. They have to make a profit off of it. But what it usually takes the form of is that they just cram the characters into whatever's popular at the time. So off the top of my head, there's a Dora the Explorer movie coming out, and I watched a trailer for it recently, and honestly, it seems like it could be kind of good. It could be kind of funny and have like a nice adventure feeling and stuff. But the type of humor it had, the type of kind of like self-awareness it had, and the sort of jokes it was making, put it in line with absolutely every single comedy for that demographic that I've seen come out in like the last few years. Like they basically take whatever property they have and twist it and mold it until it's the most profitable form that it can take. Um, and I don't see that being the case with this Strike Witches spinoff. Here, it seems like they only really considered core fans of Strike Witches, people that really enjoyed watching the other shows and really liked the characters. They had no inclination to expand the brand. They had no hope of this becoming some big crossover hit and making a ton of money. It really feels like it's just kind of a gift to the fans, and maybe that's a naive reading of it by me, but it makes me like the show even more to think of it in that context. So, like, why not? And I really did like this show. I'd give it a 7. I enjoyed myself the whole time I watched it. So, I don't know. I can only really recommend it to people who like Strike Witches, but if you did, you should watch it. It's fun. All right, let's talk about One Punch Man Season 2. Let's address the elephant in the room first. This was a huge drop-off in quality from Season 1, produced by Madhouse. It's just undeniable. Season 1 was one of the most gloriously animated shows of all time. Every single fight was just a joy to watch in its kineticism and choreography. Some of the most experimentally cool depictions of just like raw power I've ever seen in anime. Really just a masterpiece on all of those fronts. And this is not. This is very much not that. And at first, I wasn't really enjoying it because of that. I was just hyper focused on what could have been, how much worse it was than Season 1. And then I watched an episode with a friend of mine, and he had a comment that I thought was very insightful. This is my friend Chris. Shoutouts to Yarfi, the admin of the Discord server. So we were watching it at my place, and he's like, but really, like, isn't this very similar to the kind of shonen anime of our youth? Isn't this really similar to classic shonen anime? Before they kind of had this revelation of like, oh, if we make this high budget, like more people than just fans of the original manga will watch it, which was a revelation partially sparked by the first season of One Punch Man. And it's true though. Like if you compare this to your Dragon Balls, your One Pieces, your Naruto's, your early Hunter x Hunter, like these kind of classic shonen series and the adaptations that Toei and other companies made, where they were more just like, all right, let's churn out something because they'll watch it because they love the manga. It doesn't really matter what it is. If you hold it to those standards, it's actually really good. and I found myself really enjoying it on that kind of nostalgic level where, yeah, a lot of those things, the pacing, the way shots are constructed, the kind of like heat animation they use to get the through a fight scene that ought to be a lot more detailed and more choreographed. It's all classic cost-cutting techniques, but by those standards, like, very few shows did it so well, put so much love into it while cost cutting. So, for example, they really did a good job with the classic shonen static shot, where everyone is like frozen in reaction, or someone is like standing intimidatingly, like making a speech, totally static, except for maybe the mouth moving, and they just kind of pan over it. They did a great job with those because they basically have Murata's art. All they have to do is redraw it and color it, and then pan the camera over it and call it a day. And they did a great job with it. The CG also, another classic cutting measure. I have such a hard time saying cost cutting. Was done super well. The fight against Senior Centipede being the obvious example. In other action scenes, they really kind of lean into the fact that it's badly animated and make it kind of goofy and kind of play up the comedy aspects of it. And the pacing is really good too. Like the one mostly unforgivable scene I think of these low budget shonen series is how much they want to drag things out, how much they want to turn one chapter of a weekly series into one episode, just for the sake of their own schedules, and that it leads to endless reaction shots, the slowest pans imaginable, flashbacks within flashbacks within flashbacks of things happening earlier in the same episode. All of that stuff is very frustrating to watch and makes you really feel like you're kind of wasting your time. And there was very little of that. Like, I'd say in terms of the pace at which they covered content, this was basically the same as season one. So it was good to see that in certain areas they weren't being just as kind of frugal as possible. The comedy elements, as I mentioned, still really come through with this level of animation. Like the comedic timing and the dialogue and stuff, you don't necessarily need some crazy red line tier, every frame a painting, really amazing animation to get that across. You just need good VAs, and the VAs are still great, and it's still just a hilarious show. So I think if we got the rest of the series at this quality, like, if this is what it takes for every aspect of One Punch Man to eventually get animated, I'd be fine with it. I really enjoyed myself watching this. After I kind of thought about it with the right mindset. I mean, sure, it would be even better if Madhouse stepped back in and said, Monster Association arc? Dude, we got that. You really think we're going to let anyone besides us animate Black Sperm? Nah, that would be great. But, you know, this is fine too. So this, I would give an 8. It's solid enough. And again, this is mostly just based off the strengths of the original rather than the strengths of this adaptation. But if you're a shonen fan, if you like the way that shonen is written, it really doesn't get much better than One Punch Man. It's just such an ideal form of the shonen genre. Speaking of adaptations of manga I really enjoy, let's talk about Senko-san. So this is a fantastic manga to the point that it's kind of forming a cult around it. I mentioned this before when we were talking about the show as like the upcoming anime, that me and my friends, it almost started to feel like a religion was being born around this series, that we would talk about each chapter as it came out, and we would do things like on Mangadex where it shows like the popularity rankings of the series. We would like cheer for it to go up on the daily rank and then the weekly rank and stuff. It really felt like we needed to champion this series, to spread it as like holy gospel. So to say we were all very excited for this adaptation is the understatement. The premise, if you don't know, is really extremely straightforward. Senko-san comes down to Earth to take care of a beleaguered office worker. It does get a little more complicated in that the cast expands to include 2 other main characters, a brattier fox and a mangaka. But these characters aren't really necessary to make like a more complicated storyline or to have more involved relationships. It's just if you want kind of a different flavor of self-insert. If you want your caretaker fox to be a little brattier and less kind of loving and motherly, then here's another fox. If you don't want to self-insert as an office worker, but you'd rather be like a long-suffering mangaka instead, here you go, have this girl. So again, very, very straightforward, very like to a point. And this is reflected in Rimukoro, the author of the mangas, afterward, where he talks about the genesis of this series. I think this is just fantastic. It was when I was utterly exhausted. I wanted Noja Lali Kitsune Girl to take care of me. That's all I'm feeling right now. You can see him rummaging through all his manga. That's weird. There's no manga about a Nojala taking care of people. Isn't it an essential part of life? If there's none, then I just have to draw it myself. This is what we call religious epiphany. It's like he just saw the face of God and it descended onto his work to create this holy comic. So why? Why is it that we're all so devoted to this series? Why is it that everyone is losing their mind over this character? I think it's because of how they crammed so many different roles, so many different relationships you can have with someone into one character. Like we can start with the ones that are covered in the series itself. Senko often introduces herself as both his wife and his mother. And already we have a duality here that starts to defy our common kind of psychosexual understandings of relationships. But it's more than that. And she's also quite clearly his daughter. She's childlike in appearance and many things he has to take care of. And he's like the breadwinner of the family. And, you know, all of this stuff, it's more of like a daughter role. And then, of course, she's very literally a goddess, a kitsune goddess that can do all manner of supernatural things and is 800 years old and supremely powerful. But then at the same time, she's also kind of just his maid. She takes care of all the domestic tasks and cooks for him and will do anything he asks of her. But more than just a maid, isn't it kind of also like his pet, his dog? But it's not quite a dog. It's also like a fox. And she's really kind of like a time traveler. She takes on all of these time travel type tropes where she's unfamiliar with the modern world and modern technology and talks about the way things were done back in her time, which was hundreds and hundreds of years ago. So you get all of that appeal, this kind of like fun fish out of water type stuff. And in that same kind of vein, it's also quite like she's his grandmother. That's where like the whole Noja stuff comes through. With her kind of folk remedies and an old style way of doing things, an old manner of speaking and stuff. It has all of those appeals too. It seems like they're kind of longtime domestic partners in terms of this very stable routine that they have going with each other. And yet at the same time, it's like they're newlyweds. They're still trying to learn about each other. They've only been doing this for a manner of months throughout this series. So it has all of that kind of freshness and fun too. And then in many ways, she's his therapist, that he comes home after work with all of these problems and this heaviness, and she listens to him, and they talk it out, and he feels better about himself as a person, above and beyond all of the therapeutic effects, of course, of taking care of him and feeding him and making sure he's well rested and well nourished. Um, and then in this regard, she's kind of a masseuse and also a travel guide. They're always taking you places. And like a magic Uber that can warp him around. But most importantly, she's a pillow. The Mofu Mofu. So as you can see, this kind of innocent looking character, this very simple premise, I think succeeds because there's something so complicated going on behind the scenes that when you really think of how people are engaging with this character, it's their own personal subset. It's the things that are like most important to them out of seemingly an almost infinite number of roles that she can take. She can really be everything and anything to you. And that's why I think people start to have this almost religious adoration of her. So let's talk about the adaptation. This is the weight that this adaptation is carrying. This is the feeling that it must convey. And I gotta say, in some respects, I was kind of disappointed. With the production, I thought it was much worse than some of the other shows that Doga Kobo or Gada Kobo has been making lately, which are some of the finest in terms of the liveliness and creativity and boldness of animation in the slice of life genre that I've seen like outside of KyoAni's work. Like it's like truly excellent stuff. And yeah, I thought it was just okay in terms of production quality. And I acknowledge that it's kind of difficult. You want to really strike a balance with how it's animated. It can't be too lively, like it can't be too action packed, because that would distract from the relaxing, soothing nature of watching the show. but it can't be too plain either. It really has to carry that sensory bliss. It really has to immerse you in whatever the character is feeling. What I wanted to see was more kind of Hidamari style editing from Hidamari Sketch, where you're constantly kind of breaking away from a literal depiction of reality and kind of showing like diagrams of things or kind of imagined sequences. And there you can have it be that the whole, as a whole, it's like still very relaxing and soothing and contemplatively paced, but it's still very like there's a lot of variety. It's still intriguing to see how things will be depicted. That every sequence of shots will have a few different things that stand out as very creative and fresh. But I mean, again, it's easy to say. That show has my absolute favorite editing of any anime, so it's not like a reasonable thing for me to just be like, oh, I'll just do that. Obviously, that takes a very talented and specific type of directorial talent. But honestly, I think the series really just succeeds primarily as a manga, that it can only do so much in adaptation. Stuff like how they panel it, the self-paced immersion into the story, like you don't have to be dictated at the running speed of the anime. You can turn the pages whenever you like, after as much contemplation as you like. It's kind of more present in your life too. It's not like you just have to sit down once a week and just stare at the TV for 22 minutes. It's a book that you can carry with you. It's something that you can look at any time. It's something you can read just a few panels of on the train or in the bathroom and get those feelings kind of welling up within you again. And most difficult, I think, is replicating these really climactic single-page spreads or really big panels that they have in the manga, where basically, usually these come at the climax of a chapter, that Senko-san has been providing some sort of care, and our MC is kind of feeling unworthy of this, and when he kind of expresses his gratitude or something, you turn the page, and there's Senko's smiling face, reassuring you that things are going to be all right, that she's here for you, that you don't need to feel guilty or ashamed, that you're just like totally accepted and validated, and this bliss will continue forevermore. And the feeling of turning a page and just seeing that all at once and allowing it to just kind of flood over your body. I don't know how they could do it in animation. Like, I think it's impossible to pace that sort of thing. How long do you linger on this shot? What kind of movement do you have, if anything, on this shot? How do you kind of handle that suspense between this moment of kind of uncertainty and then this beautiful scene of reassurance? I kind of just think it can't be done, and then this is a unique strength of manga that animation just doesn't get. There's Super Senko-san time. This is something that ends every episode. It's a first-person segment with no narration from the focalized character. So, it's Senko-san talking to you, the viewer. You can respond at home if you like, kind of like Dora the Explorer, which you were just talking about earlier. Sometimes the screen will like nod to indicate that your character is nodding. It's a fun idea, and I think it really shows that they understand the appeal of this series. But I think because I already had a few issues with it, and I wasn't really feeling it as much as I did with the manga, it's just more highlighted the disconnect I was having. But I still thought it was pretty goofy and funny, and I like that they did it. The VAs were great though. I think that's super essential. We had a long conversation like before the series came out, like what should Senko sound like? She should be more like, I mean, we can go back to that slide. Which of those character archetypes should they focus on? But I think they did a great job. So yeah, overall, I would also give this an 8. Again, mostly on the strength of the original, rather than the unique qualities of the adaptation, unfortunately. But still, certainly a worthy show to check out, even if I would kind of recommend the manga above it. All right, let's talk about yet another adaptation of a manga series I love, Hitoribochi no Maru Maru Seikatsu. This was a great adaptation, an absolutely fantastic adaptation. I was really nervous about that. I was actually kind of pessimistic about whether or not they'd be able to pull it off. The studio making it, C2C, I'd only ever seen one of their shows before, Harukana Receive, and I was kind of disappointed in it. And I was mostly disappointed in production aspects of it, like just the way it was animated and paced and stuff. So I don't know, I was a little worried, but oh my god, it was so good. It was so good. They completely nailed it. They knew exactly what to do. The animation is adorable. It's so cute. It's just lively enough. You know, I mean, I think it would be unrealistic for C2C to try to do something on the tier of like Wataten or Uzumade. You know, like a slice of life show that just has like explosively lively animation. But they didn't really need to. Hitori Bochi has like a lot of scenes of more just kind of quiet conversation and relaxing in one another's presence and stuff. And through that, they were really able to nicely balance how it was animated. There's a great focus on the characters' expressions and how their emotions are conveyed. There's lots of like diegetic breaks for this purpose, where the art style will like change drastically, or there'll be like a small break into someone's animation. This is the sort of thing that I was hoping to see more of in Senko-san. Something that can make the whole sequencing a little more lively without it really breaking from the overall tone of what that sequence is trying to convey. The other thing I was really worried about, given that Bocchi, the manga, is a 4-koma, is that they would do really lazy, repetitive 4-koma type timing. You see this in a lot of adaptations of 4-koma shows where you can trivially, like it's almost hard not to just picture the original 4-koma strips in your head as you watch it, because they're basically timing each panel at like a consistent rate. And that can sometimes be fine. Like it's a good way to carry across the humor of the original. And it's kind of has like a pretty high floor at how bad it can be. But it just kind of feels lazy, and it feels like they can do so much more. And here's an example of where they did a whole lot more. That they did sequence-based directing. So it's not like they looked at each 4-koma strip in isolation, but they really thought about this entire arc, you know, sometimes even across chapters of the original. What is it trying to convey emotionally? How should it feel for Bocchi? Like, how should we bring across her emotions in this setting? And I think this takes a lot more work. Like, it takes a lot more kind of synthesis of a lot of disparate ideas about what's happening, and then allowing those ideas to influence every aspect of the direction, like not just the pacing or the mise-en-scene, but like the sound, and it made it such a wonderfully emotional atmosphere that you just found yourself completely lulled into the emotional tone of the series. Just fantastic stuff. Voice acting, sound direction, godly, all of the little insert songs and all of the sound effects the characters make, and just great. And this is like a strength of the original. All of the characters and all of the subsets of them, all of the interactions between any arbitrary group of the characters are just wonderful. Like you just love to see it. They're all so well defined. They all have their quirks, and yet they're all realistic too. So three-dimensional, and it's such an exciting stage of their life. Like really trying to figure themselves out and figure out how their friendships work, how their relationships work. And the premise of this series, because I didn't mention it, of course, because I forgot, is that our titular character, Hitori Bocchi, has to make friends with every single person in her class. And they really go through with this. Like, it isn't just kind of a throwaway premise that leads to the regular old 4 girls hanging out, but something that really drives the series. Her trying to meet someone new, trying to make friends with them. Sometimes these arcs stretching across multiple episodes and interweaving with other friend-making plot lines. This is such a beautiful idea. This is, I think, the best idea of humanity so far. A storyline about making friends. It worked for One Piece. It works for Bocchi. So yeah, fantastic show. Easy 9. I loved it so much. All right, we got one more show to talk about. Sarazanmai. If you haven't heard of it, I would suggest just checking it out. It's like a fun, Kappa-themed team shonen battle series, you know. They're fighting a monster every week, they're learning about friendship, they're doing transformations, there's a bunch of Kappa stuff. yeah, if you haven't heard of it, I would say don't look up anything more about it. Just go watch the first episode. It's really fun. Yeah, you know, you don't want to spoil yourself any more than that, so just go check it out. Okay, you back? Of course I have betrayed you, because the show is absolutely insane. It's not really anything like that. This is Sarazanmai is, of course, directed by Ikuhara. If you don't know Ikuhara, he's the director of the Sailor Moon shows that came out in the 90s, the legendary series Revolutionary Girl Utena, Penguin Drum, Yurikuma Arashi, a very impressive resume, involved in a whole bunch of other series on top of that. But if you know anything about these kind of modern Ikuhara series, especially Penguin Drum and Yurikuma Arashi, you'll have a very good sense of what the series is going to be like. This is very much a modern Ikuhara series. So what does that mean? It means we've got a cast of characters that have like kind of obsessive behaviors. They're very like locked into specific desires and passions. And because of this single-mindedness and kind of deep passion, they end up getting in very complex relationships with one another. Simple enough. Throughout this, there's a very complicated and mystical lore that just kind of creeps deeper and deeper into the plot. First quite innocently, sort of at its fringes, and then more and more of the story revolves around these weird mystical backstories. There's complex systems that kind of dictate a lot of the actions and relationships that are based on things like folklore and puns, but then also all the way to aspects of modern culture, cell phone culture, Amazon deliveries, things like that, that are tightly interwoven throughout the setting, such that almost every new plot element or development kind of slots into to these kind of iconic settings or systems. And generally, there's one per episode. There's a major kind of break from reality, a huge psychedelic sequence that usually has a musical number involved in it. And this kind of has a structural anchoring point that a lot of the series kind of revolves around when these scenes are hit and what the implication is each time. So, it's an Ikuhara show. That already sells it for a lot of people, I'm sure. But to me, this isn't just a modern Ikuhara show. This is like a great modern Ikuhara show, even going by the high standards that we have for this director. So I think kappas as kind of the central motif is extremely effective. This was just like a brilliant choice on their part. They're so cute and quirky and fun, but they're so pervasive in so much cultural lore of Japan that there can be just almost an endless array of jokes and puns and as I said, this sort of like system that's built up around them. There's a really nicely constrained plot. Like the cast is quite small, and most twists just kind of like bring characters kind of more back into the fold rather than spiraling out into other plot elements. And yet there's still that really explosive potential where you know things are just going to get crazier and crazier. And it really hits a nice peak for me. Like sometimes Ikuhara shows get too crazy. But this one for me, it's just crazy enough. And despite all that craziness, at its core, it's still delivering consistently extremely moving, very human stories. Things that wouldn't be out of place in a show that has no supernatural or crazy psychedelic aspects, but just very compelling stories of people's relationships and what expectations we have of each other and what it means to really connect with someone. Really beautiful stuff, like very, very touching. And to this end, I think there's a plot element of leaking. I'm not really going to explain in full what it means because it's insane. But it basically means that the other two main characters, generally once per episode, learn a secret of the third main character. These positions, of course, rotating. That completely flips the plot up until that point on its head. And I think this is a really brilliant plot device because it uses kind of these supernatural elements that they've established to enhance and make more exciting these very human stories. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, I think that's just brilliant construction. And all of the leaking scenes I found just like really gripping. Like I I was always on that wonderful borderline of like shocked, but then also saying like, oh, of course. I don't know, just I don't want to spoil too much. It's so good though. And everything moves at a really thrilling pace. Like, although a lot of the plot elements are repetitive, that they kind of go through the same structures in a lot of episodes, there's always some major twist, there's always some major development. Usually ones that you thought would happen eventually, that just like suddenly rush up to the current episode. Things that you would think are like, oh, they're establishing this. Maybe by the end of the series, we're gonna see, you know, what actually happens between these two. And it's like, oh wait, no. Later this episode, the truth comes out. Something like that. It makes the show so gripping, so so good. Another thing I really liked is again, I don't want to explain all of the what actually this means, but they fight these zombies pretty much every episode, and there's always a brief scene showing the backstory of the zombie, what wretched, depraved thing they were doing that brought them to this state. And those I thought added a lot of flavor to the world, and they were a good way to kind of flesh out. Shut up, car alarm. Car alarm going off. It's a good way to kind of bring out like some of these thematic motifs from different angles, or to explore other ones that don't really involve themselves in the main plot. Really, again, just brilliant construction. Just giving yourself so many good opportunities. The excellent voice acting, the soundtrack was so great. The ending song is easily my favorite anime song of the year so far. The technical construction in every single regard, I think, was just nearly flawless. Especially the animation. I think Mappa is a perfect fit for Ikuhara's interests. They're so full of like explosive liveliness that they can do these amazing action sequences, and yet for the more kind of human dramatic moments, they really understand how to bring out emotion from characters. It's a perfect fit. I hope Ikuhara works with Mappa again. I think the only complaint about this show that anyone can have is that it's almost too Ikuhara-y. Like, if you're not into these sorts of things in your storytelling, if Ikuhara's method of making an anime doesn't appeal to you, there's very little outside of that. It feels like he's just gaining more and more creative control with each project, and thus every show is more and more like a kind of a pure vision of Ikuhara. So it's not for everybody, that's for sure. But it's certainly worth checking out to see if it's for you. So yeah, this is, again, an easy 9. All right, that's all the shows I wanted to talk about. It's a pretty good season. I hope you enjoy hearing me rant about anime for long periods of time, because I certainly enjoy doing it. And let's look forward to what this season will bring. So far, I'm quite enjoying some shows, so can't wait to talk to you about them. All right, bye-bye.